Okay, we have 5:30 on the clock on the wall, so we will go ahead and get started. Madam Clerk, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Abraham,
Present.
Commissioner Galt,
Present.
Commissioner Kaler,
Present.
Commissioner Watkins,
Present.
Mayor Paxton.
Present. Wait, you don't have to get it right this minute, but, okay, thank you, City Clerk. We again have Gina Brock that is joining us from Emmanuel Baptist Church, Associate Minister. Is going to say give us the invocation, and then we will have Commissioner Gall do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd like to come up to the podium.
Let's pray together. Creator God, who is abounding in grace and in mercy, we are here tonight as grateful people, grateful to you for life and for this community and for how we can live in it together. We are grateful for caring people who live and work here in and around Paducah, those who strive to make life richer and fuller together, just like the people in this room, our community leaders who are giving their lives in service to others. And so we pray in their discussions tonight that ears may be open, that wisdom may abound, and that creativity may flourish. Guide them in all that they do and say, that their example of servant leadership may encourage us to do the same. Amen.
Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You'll get that while Bernice is giving her report real quick. Thank you, Gina, very much. Nice invocation. Mr. City Manager, any additions or deletions?
No. Thank you.
Okay. We have Bernice Belt that is here, and she's going to give us a quick rundown on the evening of performance. Bernice is also our chairman of the Human Rights Commission and is doing a great job there.
Did you promote me?
I'm going to.
I wanted to know if I had which hat I was going to put on. Hello, Mayor, City Manager, City Commissioners. Hello, John Perkins. I hope you approved our budget. Hello, Tammy. Thank you for allowing me to take a couple of minutes. Tammy has informed me that I have from 2 to 3 minutes. And I do want to say that we have the privilege and the honor of presenting our 6th annual Evening of Performance, sponsored by this great city and the Paducah Human Rights Commission, May 11th, a Friday evening, from 7 to 9 p.m., if not earlier than 9 p.m., at the Carson Center in the main auditorium. And we have 15 performers made up of bands and poets and dancers and guitarists. We even have someone who's going to do a type of improv and involve the audience this year. We have a bell ringing group this year, so we've tried to add new dynamics each year. And we have another performance, and thank you, Commissioner Abraham, for volunteering to open us with something very patriotic. We appreciate that. And again, that's I wanted to ask you before, because the mayor has tried to get Commissioner Watkins to sing, and we are really frightened by that idea.
Yeah. They would be too. Your audience would leave pretty quick.
Also, Commissioner Watkins, you'll be sad to know that the Blood Brothers won't be there.
I was getting
as
ready
a
to
band
ask.
that
I wrote
night,
myself.
but guess what?
What?
The son of the manager and the participant in the Blood Brothers is going to do 2 brief drum solos. He is a miracle, a living miracle. He is a little boy who survived a very serious illness when he was very small, and he's still very small.
Wow.
So we have a number of dynamics, and we like to ask all of you to come. Mayor has been there every year. And Mayor, this will be, of course, your last time as mayor to come and welcome everybody with probably Jeff Foreman from the Carson Center. And so we love to see you, and we've scheduled it in such a way that maybe it takes a little of the stress and burden off of you in order to be present. But that's May the 11th, 7 p.m., the Carson Center. Be there or be square.
Thank you, Bernice.
Thank you.
This was a way that the City Commission could get the Human Rights Commission out, let people know a little bit of what the Human Rights Commission does. And they have done a wonderful job. And Bernice, I appreciate you've been part of each performance. And thank you for the good work.
Thank you for allowing me. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Going to come out to the audience here. This is the fun part of my job and your all's job. You've heard me say many, many times that what makes Paducah great is not necessarily us sitting up here passing laws, but what really makes Paducah great are the volunteers that step up, and like the Bernice Belts and many, many people that step up and do special things for Paducah. It makes Paducah special. And we have a tremendous number of those people. Not only do we have a lot of volunteers in Paducah, but we have a lot of intelligent, smart, enthusiastic volunteers. And it makes Paducah a notch above other cities. So we have an individual here tonight that took on a fundraising project, and it was called the Empty Bowls Project. It's one thing for somebody who is at the end of their career and they've made their money and they're looking for something to do, so they're going to take on a charity and they're going to support it and work in it. That's one type of individual. There's another type of individual that's still trying to raise their family, still trying to put food on the table, still trying to send their daughter to college, trying to make their payment on their house and their car, and trying to make many, many art shows throughout the country. And for somebody like that to take an extra responsibility and say, I think I'll go out and raise $20,000 with the Empty Bowls Project. Paducah's, I never even knew what the Empty Bowls Project was, never heard of it. So he did that, and he was quite successful year one. Just put it on year two at the convention center, and it was even more successful. And so not only does Michael Terra take on the Empty Bowls Project, but he also is one of the volunteers for the Art Music Festival, and puts that on for the last, I think this will be your third year, Michael. Took it away from the city, and I think is doing a better job than the city did. And so he came to Paducah, didn't know anybody. He's been here how many years now? 3 years in Paducah, and has made a big impression on the city of Paducah. So, Michael, if you'll come forward here just a minute. We have a special award that we give, and I say this about the Duke of Paducah Award, but I really mean it about this award. This is the Mayor's Award of Merit that we give out to just very few people. But this body up here appreciates the job that you've done, and I appreciate the job you've done. And it is my pleasure to present you the city's highest award, and it is the Mayor's Award of Merit City of Paducah, Kentucky, Michael Terra, 2012. Congratulations.
Well, let me find some words somewhere. Thank you. When we came here, we had no prior attachments. We were coming here to join the Artist Relocation Program. Seemed like a good idea. We had no idea when we did that what we would find. The richness of community, commitment, the culture, the environment. Just we were delighted. And as Terras, we tend to jump in with both feet. And if we're going to do a thing, we go ahead and do it. So it's only natural for us to want to love this community as much as it loves everybody in it. So thank you guys. And I'm just one of hundreds of volunteers that make this place an amazing place to call home.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate it, and I hope you will continue to love Paducah, continue to volunteer, and make Paducah a better place. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Mayor, could we say something? Sure, Mike, before you get away from here, Michael, it's not over yet, but I just want to congratulate you and thank you for what you've added to this community. I'm amazed that you've only been here 3 years and the impact you've already had on our lives and to make Paducah a much better place to live, from organizing the Lower Town Arts and Music Festival that brings in, 15+ thousand people, 15 to 20,000 people. You and one other person headed that up. And now the Empty Bows, which you had over 1,400 people there, I know, at least, more than that. And it's catching on in other places. And you've got a lot, you're a visionary, you're a leader, and you got a great heart. And I wish you great success. I have your daughter in class this semester, and she's a very bright young lady, very mature. And I know you're proud of her, and we're proud of y'all guys, and we're thankful you call Paducah home.
And Michael, I'd like to say, as a fellow neighbor and artist, we started the Artist Relocation Program several years ago, and we had no idea when we started that program the impact that it was going to have on our community. It's not just about getting artists here to Paducah, it's about what you all have given back to the community. And you, as a group of artists that came to this community, did much more than rebuild homes. You rebuilt our community. You really did, and so thank you for that.
It's just amazing to me what happens when individuals go into a situation with the right motives. It makes things, it flows so much easier. People are drawn to the legitimacy of it. It's not about putting oneself above anything, drawing attention, and it's amazing to follow what Mayor Pro Tem Kaler said, that when you bring people into your community, the ripple effect of that is whatever is in them. Sometimes it's not so good, but in our case, it's been wonderful. And so I'd like to just congratulate you all again. Keep doing what you're doing. You may not know what the next thing is, but if it feels right, I kind of got an idea that you're going to jump in with both feet. So we'll be blessed for that. You're welcome.
It's true. We are so thankful to have people just like you in this community. And when I think about Michael Terra, I think about heart. And I read in the newspaper, and you're not only helping our community, but you're helping other communities too. Just as you reached out with the girl from Marshall County.
Yeah, that's right. She did a great job.
Exactly. So you've not only helped us, but you're helping the region, and it sets a great example. And there's so many other people that volunteer just like you on a daily basis, and we're so thankful to have you.
Thank you, Michael.
I need to award and run. I'm co-director of the Arts and Music Festival, and there's a meeting at my house at 6:30.
Okay.
And do we have enough volunteers for that? Do we need more?
We could use more volunteers. We use more volunteers.
So anyone out there, call Michael.
Call me at 908-0090, and volunteer, that'd be terrific. We still need funding. We're still making calls and collecting funds to put it on. It is, it's a huge volunteer operation, and it's regional. It's all about Paducah and our region. The artists are from here, the food is from here, the music is from here, and of course the volunteers are from here. So,
Cool.
any help we can, and interest we can get, we're good for it. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Well deserved. Well deserved. Thank you. Quickly, Commissioner Watkins, you want to talk about your presentation to Coach Calipari the other night?
Oh yes, thank you, Mayor. That was a highlight of my life. That was awfully fun at Coach Calipari and three of his assistant coaches and former coach Joe B. Hall all showed up by bus at Kroger Friday night, and the crowd was estimated at 2,500. I think it was actually a little bigger than that because they were taking pictures of like 20 each, and there were probably 15 groups. So I would say closer to 3,000 people were there, and everybody was so excited. He brought the championship trophy with him, and we all got a picture with him, and I got to hold part of that trophy, Richard, and had a picture there with Coach Cal. And he was very generous. He took pictures with the firefighters and then with the police officers, and it was just real. He held the helmet with the firefighters, and he was just so gracious and thankful and kind, and great sense of humor, and just a really nice individual, a great human being. And all of his coaches, they were just so kind to everybody with autographs and pictures and just to talk. People just wanted to talk to him. And I don't usually get nervous in public speaking, but I will say I was nervous in making that presentation and making Coach Calipari the newest Duke of Paducah, and he was proud to get it. And he was happy to be in Paducah, and we want to. He said this was the biggest crowd of all the cities that he stopped in, and I don't know how many there were, but several over 2 or 3 days. But he said we had the biggest crowd for him, and they were loud, and it was absolutely a lot of fun.
Good, good. Well, great. Thank you. Gee, Barry, I tried to get you involved in that, and you were out of town, I guess. Okay, all right.
I know how you feel.
Yeah, Commissioner Abraham was going to help, so wanted to get everybody involved. But anyway, we will go ahead and start the meeting. Ordinances introductions. So start with Commissioner Abraham.
I move that the Board of Commissioners introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance authorizing and directing the city of Paducah, Kentucky, to satisfy an order of the court awarding attorney fees and expenses to counsel for plaintiffs in Barry Carter et.al. versus the city of Paducah, Kentucky, McCracken County Circuit Court, Civil Action Number 06C I00072 in the aggregate sum of $121,854. This ordinance is summarized as follows. The city finance director is hereby authorized to direct and expend funds to satisfy an order awarding attorney fees in full for the aggregate amount of $121,854. Payment shall be made to the law firm of Woodley and McGivery, counsel of record for the plaintiffs in Barry Carter's et.al. versus the city of Paducah, Kentucky, McCracken Circuit Court, Civil Action Number 06-CI-0072.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Perkins, is he going to talk about this?
Well, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, you may recall back in December you all approved a plan for us to pay out right at $1.5 million in back wages and related fringe benefits and interest on a lawsuit that it was a stipulated judgment where we were required to make this payment to a group of firefighters, former and current firefighters. And as you may recall, it was over the issue of how we calculated overtime. We'd been following the rules as prescribed by the state since 1983, and for some reason they decided to change the rules on us, and that suit was, that kind of thing has been going on all over the state for some time. Ours was, like I said, $1.5 million. This will actually be the final chapter in the book of this long situation where we...
Nightmare.
Anyway, we will have to. We have the opportunity or the privilege of paying the plaintiff's lawsuit legal fees, but this is it. This is the final chapter, and we're finally going to be done with it.
Any questions for Mr. Perkins? Okay, thank you, John. Commissioner Galt?
I move that the Board of Commissioners introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending ordinance number 2011-67825, entitled, an ordinance adopting the City of Paducah, Kentucky annual budget for the fiscal year July 1, 2011 through June 30th, 2012, by estimating revenues and resources and appropriating funds for the operation of city government. This ordinance is summarized as follows: that the City of Paducah's annual budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2011 and ending June 30th, 2012 be amended by a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $1,582,680 to Fire Department line item.
Second.
Okay, no more to be said about that. It's important for our audience to know that the city followed the rules from the state to the letter of the law. We did it exactly the way they laid it out by the Department of Labor. I will not go into how in the world we're having to pay this money out, but we are. And it's been a hardship not only on Paducah, but Louisville and many, many other cities that have had to do the same thing. So I guess we put this nightmare behind us and we move forward. So we will be voting on that at our next meeting. Thank you.
Mayor, it might be worth noting that because of the goodwill on both sides, that it could have been a lot worse. And so while it was a lot of money, it like I say, it could have been a lot worse. So we're glad, like you said, to put it behind us and move forward.
Right. Do we need a motion to go into this workshop?
No.
Okay. Both our city manager, Jeff Peterson, and our finance director, John Perkins, have been working diligently for the last many weeks to start the budgeting process. This is just a synopsis of where we are, to talk about and to get everybody's mind thinking about the budget process. We will still have additional meetings on the budget, additional decisions to be made, but this is a general idea of where we are and why we are there. I want to commend both John and Jeff for their hard work. And so with this, I will turn it over to Jeff Peterson.
Thanks, Mayor. As the Mayor pointed out, the budget process is underway in preparation for adopting a budget in late May or very early June to take effect for 12 months beginning July 1. So it's an annual process that we go through. And this is, I guess, my 30th or 31st rodeo with being part of preparing an annual city budget. So things have changed a lot, and most of the change in municipal budgeting, in fact, has occurred in the last 3 or 4 years. And we're going to talk about some of that tonight. The Let me say that the entire process will be collaborative, and that's part of the reason we're with you tonight on this, but it's also collaborative at all levels in the organization. I'm highly expectant of the department directors to perform in terms of their tasks that they do in preparing a budget. We are fortunate to have such a capable finance department led by John Perkins and his crew that does a lot of the numbers, crunching the projections and so on and so forth, that can produce some of the documents that we'll be working from tonight and that you'll see later in the process. And let me say before we get into it, because a lot of what we're really wanting to do tonight is paint a picture and help people understand the climate that we're working in. And people can vary, I guess, in their judgment about how the budgeting process impacts the city finances and make some assumptions or draw some conclusions based on their own individual views of how things lay out or ought to lay out. And I think that really speaks to the essence of city budgeting. Private business is in the profit business. Cities are in the values business. So when we take a look at what it is that we're budgeting for and how we spend our money, we're doing that based on the city commission and staff's best read and belief about what the community values are. And that's not necessarily the same thing as trying to decide what's profitable or what makes the most sense economically all of the time. So it's important to understand that the city has tremendous responsibility to the entire citizenry, and we have to have in place the capacity to serve people equitably and responsibly as well as responsibly, to have accountability for what we do and how we spend money and so on and so forth. And those are just a few of the primary values that lie behind the city process of service delivery and spending the taxpayers' money. So with that said, I'm going to go through a little PowerPoint presentation tonight, John and I. And also with that, we have actually in paper form for you to look at and reference as you wish. The second year of what was developed last year as a 5-year financial projection of our investment fund. The investment fund happens to be the fund within which the additional payroll tax that was authorized some years managed. It really represents, as we will comment on later on, some of the more discretionary area of the city budget, and we will get into more detail later, but it is important that we isolate that out and project it, because as we make decisions about changes to the budget, particularly in additions to the city budget, this is where we would need to look, because it is something that, again, has a lot of discretion with respect to how it's spent. So we'll get right into the slide presentation, and John and I are going to do a lot of tag team here, so we hope to give you a pretty good idea of what's going on here with the budget. Let me first start this out by putting this in the context. I mentioned before how things had changed. I think most people associate governmental budgeting with something called incremental, and that's not always portrayed in a real positive way, the assumption being that we do all the same things we've always done before, only we put more money to them the next year. Guess what? Not only was that never 100% accurate, but it's certainly not the case today. And part of the reason it's not the case, admittedly, is the fact that you cannot incrementally add to a budget if your revenue is not increasing. So in the old days, if I want to kind of portray this a little bit sarcastically, as we looked forward to a little more revenue every year, the decision-making process of the budget came down to how we were going to spend that additional revenue. And we sort of made it easy on ourselves by saying, well, we're going to take that additional revenue and apply it to the expense increases in the programs that we have. So did we review a lot in that process? Well, I won't answer that question. What I would suggest is that it probably didn't force a lot of review necessarily. That has changed because of the financial challenges of what we call the quote-unquote new normal that is characterized by flat or declining revenues. If your revenue base is not increasing, then you don't have the ability to balance a budget just based on taking the additional revenue and allocating it out proportionally to the way your program spending exists prior. So inherent in this, I think, is an acceptance of the fact that resources are not increasing. They're either flat or maybe even decreasing. So the emphasis needs to be on how you are allocating the money that you have. So it asks you really to mine down a little deeper and take a look below the surface and ask questions about how you've been allocating that money in the past. I'll get to that a little bit more. But the point I want to make here is that it is a different climate, and we are still in it. I think we all know that the economic downturn and recession that began 3 or so years ago impacted city budgets. I know you're all through, before I arrived on the scene, a couple tough years. We're not out of that yet. We are projecting a challenging budget for next year because of the fact that our revenues are projected to be flat. By the way, this quote came from a white paper that was recently put out by the Government Finance Officers Association, which is a very credible organization that is a professional association of the John Perkins of the world. It is also the same association that awards us a Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting that, as you know, we've received for a number of years in a row. Okay, I'll try to point, and stop me if you're unclear, please, about anything, or John, and we'll explain this, but I'd like to start this out, again, thematically, where times are a-changing, to show you a couple of trend lines. The green trend, the dotted line, is revenues, and the expenditure line is the red line. What you saw happening in the past was a more or less steady pattern of revenues going up at least as much as expenditures, and in fact, from year to year, the revenue growth exceeding the expenditure growth. Well, that is what allowed incremental budgeting to happen, or the decision-making to be on, well, how do we take that additional money and allocate it out? I might mention that as recently as 2011, that trend changed. This spike up in revenues is an anomaly. That's actually a one-time revenue that came in. I forgot what it was, John.
You're talking about 11?
Yeah.
Flood-related.
Yeah, that's a big flood-related reimbursement that we got. Had it not been for that, that would have been down here closer. But we saw the two trend lines pass each other going into this year, and that signals the real change in situation where we now have projected revenues declining or remaining relatively flat, and a gap opening up between revenues and projected expenditures. So that's where the action is. That explains the situation that we're in right now. That suggests that there's an imbalance in resources between what we've historically been spending and what we would continue to spend with inflationary increases and available revenue. So that really is where the action's at. Okay, what resources are available? In the general fund, which is a composite of a number of revenue sources, including the payroll tax, the insurance premium tax, property tax, and many others. Projecting $30.2 million for next year. The investment fund, which is the additional 0.5% of payroll tax, projecting $4.5 million. The general fund revenue projection of $30.2 million is up about 300,000 plus, right around 1%, or what we would consider to be more or less flat. There are a couple significant trends going on in the general fund. We are experiencing some growth on the payroll tax, but that is being offset by a loss in the insurance premium tax revenue. So we've got two things going on simultaneously. Some symptoms of the situation that we have at present that we think you need to be aware of. We are certainly aware of them for how they are impacting the budget challenge this year. Fund balances are not increasing. The reason they're not increasing is because we're not taking in more revenue than we're spending. And that is not to suggest that we're out of control spending. That is just to suggest that the revenue growth has slowed down or stabilized. So we say that in the next bullet point, we have revenue growth slowing down. We say it a little more emphatically, substantially. The next bullet point, general fund operational shortfall is expected to increase. We don't see a turnaround in the near term without some upward swing in one of our major revenue sources. By the way, the insurance premium tax decrease is a multi-year trend. We've been losing about $250,000 or dropping about $250,000 a year. That is very significant. We don't know what's going to happen there. We think the market is getting a little harder, meaning insurance premiums might stiffen up a little bit. We're concerned that people who evidently are practicing some avoidance now might continue to do that or even do more of it. We don't know on the payroll tax because it is so economically sensitive. Obviously, there's a lot of good effort going on in the community and a lot of decisions to continue and incite private investment in employment sectors. We hope that we continue to be successful there, but we recognize that that is an economically sensitive revenue source, and there could be a major swing in as little as a year's time, depending on what happens to the employment base. The fourth bullet point under symptoms is very significant. There's no general fund revenue for capital maintenance, and what that is saying is that within the general fund, that $30.2 million, there's not $1 available to put back into facilities to maintain our critical infrastructure that's important for service delivery. Now, we'll get back to that point a little bit later on, but that is a very, very significant red flag. That's indicative of the fact that operational expenditures are consuming all of the revenue that we have within the general fund, leaving us needing to look elsewhere for resources to maintain our infrastructure, particularly our building infrastructure. Possible ways to deal with these, well, raising taxes is a legal option. It's not an option that we're considering this year. Eliminate or reduce programs. Well, in this budget climate, compared to the incremental increase that I explained earlier, I think we need to look at that. And the first step in doing that, and I've charged the department directors with taking a look at their budgets with respect to the individual programs within their budget. We did not get into this in great detail this year. There are processes that are out there that I've been the part of in another city that really structure that kind of thing, but we've taken the critical first step of being aware and better aware of the fact that we can categorize or we can encapsulate, in fact, a lot of our expenses within individual programs. So I've encouraged the department directors to begin doing a program inventory so that they can develop, I think, a better awareness and cognizance of where they're spending their money and how much money they're spending in various areas. Now, I'm not saying that everything lends itself to drawing a nice box around, but you'd be amazed how much really does. And then the other treatment option that's related to the focus on programs is to conduct a thorough prioritization process to allocate your existing resources according to priorities that have been developed. And that starts and needs to reflect the City Commission as their priorities and their values reflect the community, and then we go from there at the administrative level. Questions about any of that? John, feel free. Jump in.
You mess up, I'll let you know.
Okay. General fund balancing outlook. Now, this is purposefully ambiguous, but there are a couple of important points we'll make. We've already touched on the projected revenue. Now, here we go. We are starting this budget process projecting revenue. That is in stark contrast to the old way of doing it, where you estimate expenditures and then you somehow manipulate the revenue to balance that. We don't believe that that is acceptable this year, to project expenditures and then turn around, come to the commission and say, oh, by the way, this is how much revenue it's going to take. You make the decisions that you have to make it available. Unless anybody disagrees with that, I'll continue. John?
I'm just going to maybe give a little perspective. We're looking at $30.1 million in revenues. We hope to get that. It'd be nice if it were more, but I'm not that optimistic, and we'll see soon. But to give you a perspective, you'd have to go clear back to 2010 to be above more than what it has been in the past. Because in 2010 it was 30 million, right at 30 million. And then you pre-recession, in 2008 it was at 30.4 million. So we're not even back yet to pre-recession numbers. Now I hope that will improve, but as like the city manager said, this insurance premium tax has just got us baffled. We don't understand, and we've had 3 years in a row that it just continues to go down. And you all may recall, we've always had challenges with trying to predict the insurance premium tax. The way I always describe that is the revenue does this constantly, and there's no pattern to it. Now there's a pattern to it. It's just going down, and so hopefully that'll straighten itself out. Thank goodness that payroll tax, it's a much bigger revenue, and so 1% of that is much bigger than what we're losing in the way of insurance, and we're losing, some years we're losing 3 and 4% on the insurance premium tax. So just if we can get them both to run the right direction, we'll be much better off.
Excellent point. For 4 years now, we've been on more or less a downward trend on the revenue side, and we wish that were the case on the expense side, but we all know that it's not. To take a look at the next two categories here, appropriations, we purposely have that blank because we just didn't feel that we could produce a figure tonight that was defensible or explainable. The third category, cash carry forward, as you all know, it's common for cities to balance part of their general fund proposed expenditures with some carryover cash. In fact, this budget year that we're in right now, I believe that we appropriated over $600,000 of cash to balance the budget. We won't have $600,000 of cash to balance the budget this year. It will be less. How much less? We're not sure. It could be significantly less, which is going to add to the challenge. So, in the worst case scenario is it would be nothing, meaning there would be a total of $30,170,000 available to balance the budget. Probably not going to be nothing. Probably not going to be 600,000, and I realize that's a big range there, but we want you to be aware of the role that carry over or carry forward cash plays in balancing the budget. I would say that as we have streamlined the budgeting process, and I know that work was underway when I got here. I'm not saying that began with me, but one of the things you do as you belt tighten is that you make your appropriations more exact, and you try to cut out what is commonly referred to as fluff. So your appropriation, the amount of money that a department director is given to spend in a particular area, is probably going to be more accurate, meaning there's going to be less unspent because they needed it all. Well, when that happens, cash doesn't accumulate back into the general fund to become part of the next year's carryover. So that practice and that discipline, which is very appropriate, has that sort of negative effect in that it doesn't grow cash because we're spending more of what we're appropriating because we're tighter. We're maybe not appropriating as much, we're spending more of the total we're appropriating because we're tighter.
John, on the insurance tax, have you checked with other communities, or the other communities, is their trend line down also?
Well, this year I have not done that. In past years, we made it a point to always ask other second-class cities what they were doing. In fact, before 9/11 happened, we had gotten together a number of second-class cities and kind of studied the problem, and several cities. Let me give you a perspective on this. There's about 2,000 insurance companies that do business in our state, about 700, believe it or not, in Paducah. They're not here, but they do business here. And the state has full control under the Kentucky Revised Statute. We have no control over any of this, the rules of how this works on the insurance premium tax. Well, anyway, the reason I say that is this. The state has to control it. State has to review and audit these companies, these 2,000 some odd audits or companies. And back then, anyway, they told us they had enough money to audit, I think, is between 20 and 30 companies. Well, you can do the math and figure out when you're eventually going to get around to all 2,000 of these companies and review them. And so the cities got together and said, hey, look, we'll kick in some cash if you'll vote, if you'll audit some more of these companies. And then 9/11 happened, 9/11 happened. And so that fell apart. In the middle of last decade, there was some good legislation passed where they tried to be more precise on where the risk is. And they did that based on zip codes and all kinds of different things. You know, a lot of folks say that they live in Paducah, but they really live just outside the city. But they call themselves Paducah, and you could even have the same zip code that I do, and I live in the city. And so they've tried to fix those kinds of problems. And there were some, a fellow down in Bowling Green not too many years ago told me that they were monitoring the payments that were being made to them by the insurance companies. One company made a $50,000 payment to them one quarter, and they normally made a $5,000 payment. And they called the company and said, why is it so big? Did you sell more insurance or what? They said, no, it was just easier to write one city, one check as opposed to 50 cities. And so we gave all their money to you. I mean, that was just how loose it was. And the cities have no control over it. And it's a state issue. It's unfortunate that it is, but it is. So to answer your question, I haven't called other cities of late, but we are certainly watching it very closely. And we'll probably follow up with that soon.
Good, thank you.
Okay, looking at some projected increases that impact the general fund, again, working with that 30 million approximate revenue. Wage settlements projected, either settled or projected next year, settled being by union contract, is projected for non-union. We're expecting an expense of $270,000. Our legislatively mandated increase in state pension, $260,000. Our projected increase for fuel, $92,000. Our projected increase for liability insurance, $40,000. Total of $662,000 between those four major areas. This is not intended to be inclusive of every expense increase, every inflationary cost increase or pressure on the general fund budget or the director's budgets or their individual programs. There will no doubt, if we were to have been able to calculate all of the inflationary expense increases in the general fund, that $662,000 figure would be greater, without question. I don't know how much greater, but probably materially greater. So this is intended to show you that before we even get started, we've got $662,000 worth of cost increase in those categories that somehow need to be covered in the budget. So I referred back earlier to the fact that payroll tax increase is projected to be up some and insurance premium down some. I think the net, there's still a small gain there of maybe $300,000. I think I said something like that. Mm-hmm. So for tonight's purposes, consider that our general fund revenue increase might be $300,000 approximate. Right there is the start of the ball game. $662,000 inflationary increases are almost double our revenue increase from those four major categories alone.
And it might be of interest to note that we're talking about the state pension. The contribution rate is totally out of our control. Back in 2005, hazard duty employees, which would be police and fire, that contribution rate was 22%. And 13, which is next year, it's going to be 38%. And non-hazard duty, it was about 8.5%. That's going to be about 20%. So if we had all that back, this would be easy to balance, because that's just a huge number.
Okay, within the general fund are a couple of pension obligations that we have that we need to budget for every year. The old police and fire pension, and then the debt service associated with selling a bond in 2005 to replenish the fund to be able to make those payments. So we now have a debt service on the replenishment of the fund that actually exceeds the annual outlay in amount of payments, so just under $1 million there. And we just point that out as something that's non-discretionary that needs to be provided for as well.
That's close to the same amount as it was last year, right?
It is.
So it's just showing, it's there. and
It just
has to be
continues.
paid.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the assumptions that we have and some of the direction provided to directors and basis for reviewing directors' budget requests include the following. We are preparing a budget based on the premise that we will rely on existing resources without a increase in tax rate. Secondly, as I mentioned before, we are continuing to improve from year to year in our projections on both the revenue and appropriation side to make those as accurate as we can based on historical trends, as well as any new considerations that come up in a given year that might take something up or down. Trying to put as much emphasis on that as we can, so that, particularly on the appropriation side, that we're not over budgeting even at the individual line item basis. Significantly, the department directors have been asked, that's a little stronger than that, required to submit a budget request with an appropriation that does not exceed their appropriation this year. So their target, if you will, for the appropriation or the amount of their budget is the amount of money that's in this year budget. So think back on those four major cost areas and how they might be impacting individual directors' budgets, particularly those that are more labor intensive. They need to find a way to cover those costs within their existing appropriation. We think, as I said earlier, that some appropriation from the fund balance may be used to balance the general fund budget. We just don't know how much. We're convinced of one thing: it will be less than the amount that was able to be used this year. Want to assure the Commission that the cash reserve policy of 8% of operating expenditures will be maintained. Mentioned earlier that the department directors have been encouraged to conduct program review and inventory so that they have a better ability and inclination to look below the surface and take a look at the program level of what they're doing and ask the tough questions of whether or not it continues to be important to do things at the level that they have been. Again, if we cannot ask ourselves those questions, we're not giving ourselves the ability to thoughtfully manage with declining resources. As we look forward to the presentation of the budget to the Commission, I anticipate sharing with you at that time what some of those decisions were in terms of any program reductions, or I'm sure will be some recommendations for some elimination of programs as well. Now, when I use the word program, don't read size into that. Program could range from $1 million down to $50. So this doesn't mean that a big chunk of anything is necessarily going away. It's just that we are giving ourselves the ability to take a look at things at the program level and ask ourselves the question of whether or not something makes as much sense to continue doing in this new normal as what it did in the old days when we had the luxury of allocating additional revenue across everything so we could continue to do things the way we'd always done them. The investment fund will be the source of revenue to address facilities, maintenance, and construction needs going forward. And now the investment fund. Any questions on the general fund before we take a look at the investment fund? Okay, again, you've been given a 5-year projection on the investment fund that's both a historical look at what we're doing now very categorically, actually more than that, very, very project or agency specific, as well as a projection forward of what we see based on what our current commitments are, what projects are being discussed, and what policies are being thought about. A little bit about the investment fund. Again, it's what I call a special revenue fund. It's something that happened in Paducah, that happened in a lot of cities around the country sometime in the last 8 or 10 years. A lot of cities made the decision, you know, we want to do more. There's some things we want to do that our general fund doesn't allow us to do. We think maybe we're a little lean in some areas. Maybe we want to branch out and start doing some things we haven't done before. One of the things that drove these special revenue funds has been the emerging role of local government in economic development, so it didn't surprise me to see that economic development was one of the authorized uses for that in Paducah, as it was in many other cities. Neighborhood redevelopment was one of the stated uses of this, and by the way, this was adopted by commission ordinance, and these uses were written into the ordinance, and they define and constrain, if you will, how this money can be used now. Infrastructure, capital investment, that's a very broad area, and one we're kind of focused on right now, as it relates back to what I said earlier, that within the general fund itself, there is really no money available anymore to do that within the general fund, so increasingly we have to look at the investment fund. And property tax relief was promised as part of this, again, as it was in many of these special revenue tax increases around the country, and I don't know that that's ever been quantified, how much the investment fund has saved people in property tax. It could probably be done, but certainly there are a lot that the city's been able to do with this fund that we'd have not been able to do otherwise, or would have had to raise property taxes in the general fund to do. So I think it's clear to people, if we explain it in those terms, that there has been property tax relief come about. So, as I mentioned, without the investment fund half-cent payroll tax passed back in 2005, the city's discretionary spending ability would be far less. This fund is the only source of revenue to construct and maintain facilities and infrastructure necessary to deliver core services. Already mentioned that. Much of the bonded indebtedness of the city is expensed against this fund. That's a very significant point, because the city has become reliant on the revenue within the investment fund to service the debt on various bond issues or borrowings that the city has done. Not all of them, but many of them. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Also with the investment fund, all the city funding support for our quasi-public agencies, actually some of them are public, but our related agencies, partner agencies, whatever you want to call them, is expensed against the investment fund, with the exception of the PATS budget, Paducah Area Transit System, which you can sort of draw your own conclusion on, that here we have Paducah Area Transit budgeted through the city's general fund, right alongside our other city departments, so one would assume and expect that the same sort of approach to budgeting and allocation of the money for PATS would be very similar to what we're doing with other city departments. The allocation of the investment fund. I mentioned debt service, also known as capital financing. Currently, of the total projected revenue for the investment fund, what is the projected revenue next year, John? Is it
4.5 million.
4.5 million will take in. 1.5 million and change of that will be allocated towards debt payment, and that comprises a percentage of the annual revenue of the investment fund of 34%. I mention that only because of two things. Number one, that percent of investment fund revenue that's becoming allocated to pay debt is increasing. I believe that's up from a few percentage points from last year. And also because, in my belief, and John agrees with this, we're reaching a percent there where we need to be concerned that we are and will lose more of the discretionary ability for programming money out of the investment fund as a higher percentage of it gets obligated towards multi-year long-term debt financing and debt payments. Again, I'm not questioning the appropriateness of that whatsoever. We're very fortunate to have the investment fund, but this is one of the things we need to monitor and be a little bit mindful of. What are some of the things that major expense areas in the investment fund that we have budgeted and will endeavor to budget for next year? The city's support for GPEDC, Entree Paducah are in there. The city chooses to provide financial support for the airport authority, which is not a legal obligation of the city, but it's something that in prior times we found the ability to do that. And one of the things that becomes perhaps something that would be reviewed as that ability has become less going forward. The convention center operating subsidy, this is one of the positive outlooks in the budget. I believe we budgeted $175,000 this year. In the current year budget, the convention center board is anticipating something less than that. We actually increased that amount, thinking that it might not be a bad idea to retain some ability through appropriation for the city to respond to a capital-related item that could occur, because my understanding is that the request that the city will be getting from the convention center would not necessarily include any monies for those kind of things. So I think it would only be prudent if we provided some recognition of that in the budget preparation so that it didn't come as a surprise or a unanticipated challenge if something came up during the year. So we've got about $782,000 programmed out of the investment fund. Footnote below, I'm not sure if that's in the right order. I'll make that point as we go forward. Everything else from the investment fund, kind of the potpourri, if you will, the biggest portion of the investment fund is in the following areas, the biggest of which from one year to the next is our street resurfacing and sidewalk program. All of the city resources that are generated locally that go into street resurfacing and sidewalk come through here. Now, we receive gas tax money from the state that supplements that, but these are the local resources that are generated here in Paducah that go into those programs. We're going to budget next year $850,000 for site improvements associated with the prospective hotel development. We're anticipating the prospect of an ED project, maybe in the area of $400,000. That could be more, could be less, just depending on what materializes in a given year. We think it's a good idea to build an anticipation of that into the budgeting process. The rest of the items going down are pretty historical. Again, the emphasis this year is going to be on maintaining that level of support. The ability to take on anything new just isn't there unless something is reduced or eliminated or some combination of that. Let me go forward just to see if... Okay, something I do want to mention on this page, and let me first say back to the footnote from the previous slide that I did not elaborate on. The city right now does not really have a very well-developed capital improvement budgeting process for our facilities. It's something that I think at one time we had a better program than we do now. It's something that we're working on. It's something that concerns me because we don't really have the ability to lay that out in front of you and illustrate it the way it should be, and to give you the benefit of a better crystal ball to look down the road. So that's something that is going to get better, but it concerns me that we do not have in our budget an awareness of what some of our obligations are there, and so we are underfunded. Remember last year I asked you to make an appropriation for $100,000 for, I believe we called it general facilities maintenance, and Rick administers that program and worked cooperatively with a number of departments to come up with uses, and I think that's been allocated out for a few months already, and a number of departments got a few little things done here, and it helped. It was some Band-Aids in a lot of areas. It's something we need to continue to do, and we need to add to that amount, so we're going to propose a $25,000 increase, or at least today that's our thought, if we can make a balance. You'll see below that a second line item called leased city property maintenance. We have properties that city departments and programs run out of, and then we have properties that we lease out to other agencies for worthy public programs that the city retains maintenance responsibilities on, at least the big ticket items. We have a couple that we think are overdue and really need to be addressed next year. And Rick, would you make just a couple comments on those two, if you don't mind?
Mayor, Commission, what Jeff's talking about is the River Heritage Museum. About 3 years ago, a local contractor did an assessment of the building. It's a historic building. It has some problems that order magnitude or range $60,000 to $80,000 to make those corrections on that River Heritage Museum. Then also one that we all see day in and day out is the Market House Square that has structurally it's sound, but visually it's in need of attention for that. That's just two of probably about 10 different properties, but those are those that are getting we've received several complaints or several concerns through emails. Jeff and I have been talking about those. We need to get these appropriated because we would like to make the corrections, but if the monies aren't there, we don't know how to make the corrections. So, and Mayor, I believe you've received some concerns as well with those facilities, and I believe Commissioner Kaler. So we're making an attempt to, I guess, align finances with problems to resolve those problems.
Good. Any questions for Rick? Thank you.
If you don't mind, Rick, one thing that doesn't appear here that I think is needing to be brought forward is this building we're in right here. The City Commission, I think, is aware that some work has been underway for a while, a few years, a couple years anyway, to take a look at some structural issues in this building. The building came into service in 1960.
I believe it was mid-'60s, somewhere in there. But
so it's 50 years
I was
old
4.
plus. And to my understanding, there's not been a lot of reinvestment in it, which is credit probably to the design and the construction, that things have lasted as long as they have to. But given the critical importance of this building to the operation of Paducah city government, it's time that we seriously took a look at deficiencies that exist here and begin the process to plan to address some of those going forward. Rick, would you elaborate just a bit on that?
It's not something that I'm particularly pleased with as far as the appearance of the building as we all I guess commute to the building every day. But if you look up at this awning, you'll see the spalling, peeling paint. That's because of concrete moisture buildup in the paint. we can paint it every year and it'll peel off every year. We have some structural problems with the eaves. I don't know if you're far enough away from the building. Sometimes you'll see the eaves are drooping on the corners. We've actually had a structural engineer look at totally removing this structure as far as concrete and restoring it. The building will still look the same, but that massive, I guess, weight needs to be removed because structurally it's reaching some deficiencies and being replaced with a steel structure that has the same look. It won't change the appearance of the building, but then that involves the roof. Okay, and then there's seismic. I guess we live in a seismic zone, so getting the building potentially seismic retrofitted for where we're at. So when we start looking at these things, we've talked about this room as far as the appearance, the decor, just upgrading the building, security, several things. And when you start looking at these projects, they start snowballing, and it's hard to decide on what project can you start and stop on and then move forward or stage it out. We're going to look at having, a local engineering firm, architect firm, give us a comprehensive report card and what we need to do to the building as far as getting it, back up to an acceptable range or its anticipation. We have also the economics of more modern, energy usage of the building. So when you start putting all these things together, it's easy to put together a project that might be $1.5 million, $2 million project on this building alone. And of course, this is not something that it has to be professionally done and put together. So you'll have a professional services contract, being presented to you maybe sometime in the near future, depending on how these budget allocations go. We need to get busy on those kind of things because this building is 60 years old, and as Jeff stated earlier, I don't think that we've done anything major to the building, and it's not going to last forever. So we have some aging problems on facilities we own.
I'd put a positive blush on it. The theme would be something like how we get the next 30 years use out of a 60-year-old building. And
I'm not asking to build a new one.
That's right. Thanks, Rick. Okay, so that's a look at the projects in the investment fund. Let's talk a little bit about the bottom line finances there. We're projecting, as we said, $4.5 million. The cash carry forward is projected to be $440,000, which it's good. It's nice to have some cash to carry forward, and I think that's a similar amount to what we've been carrying forward in the past, so we're not raising a huge red flag there. Total resources to allocate, we think, just under $5 million. As of right now, we're looking at $5.5 million in appropriations, so we have a shortfall of $500,000 plus that somehow we need to work out of this thing before it can be brought into balance. There are a lot of ways to do that. Again, I mentioned the City Hall project and a couple other things because I'm just raising the warning sign that deferred maintenance, while it seems to work to balance a budget in 1 year, it's not a long-term solution. So we need to have a greater awareness of that and start to have plans for dealing with things like the condition of this building. And some of what we think are problems are really opportunities. When we think about the energy side of it and the HVAC, we have 50-year-old energy systems running this building, and I think everybody can only imagine if they had 50-year-old air conditioners and furnaces in their homes, how the efficiency ratings would compare to what's available nowadays. There's also continues to be the decision-making between, on some bigger ticket items, trying to cash flow them in a given year or bonding. And again, that's a tough balance to find, but the more we bond, the more of our annual operating revenue we tie up and the more discretion we lose to cash flow things. So this fund is not without its challenges either, but on balance, I guess I don't want to paint a contrast between it and the general fund, but this is more discretionary in many areas. It's also does not as closely, I guess, reflect city core programs and traditional service responsibilities. So when you think about things on a prioritization basis, some of that might become a little clearer as we got a little further into a prioritization process. And some of it gets down to also, or can be considered with respect to what the role of the city is and how you define that. And again, that's back to that values thing, but ultimately, the resources need to match the values. Debt service, debt history that the city currently has, this is just a 3-year running total from year to year on the amount of debt. This is inclusive of everything. At the end of the year in 2011, the city had $28.8 million of indebtedness. It was slightly higher the following year and will be slightly lower the end of next year unless there's anything added to it. Again, this is inclusive of any debt that we have. We'll break this down a little bit in the next slide. Now, June 30th projected, you notice an asterisk there. The drop from 30.1.1 to 29.4 is attributable solely to debt payment and no additional debt. We note below that fiscal year 2013 may add additional debt for the following: Noble Park Pool, upwards to $1 million. We are well on track with that project, and that's a very likely scenario there. The Sports Park Pavilion, again, depending on the success of private fundraising and the decision-making process that could lead to the green light for Phase 1, would be an additional $2.2 million. I think that's less likely that if that goes that it would be 2013, but it would be the year after under any event if again the green light goes on for that. So we'll see from one or both of those sources more than likely some increase to our bonded indebtedness, but keep in mind that we pay debt off every year as well, so some of the existing debt will go down. In fact, $9.6 million of the 29.4 is funded by a combination of bed taxes, which is the bigger part of that by far, and also a agreement that we have with Infinity for a repayment on a building that the city financed. So we have revenue streams outside of the investment fund. But remembering back to that percentage that I used of, was it 34% of the investment fund is obligated debt payment? That is still true. The portion of this debt that is the responsibility of the investment fund at present is consuming 34% of the investment fund's annual revenue stream.
So you have netted that out then, Jeff?
Yeah.
The 9.6 million, and it still comes to that?
Yes, yeah, that is independent of the portion that.
I want to make sure that I don't think you guys are saying the same thing. That 29.4 million, that includes the 9.6, so the net would be closer to 20 million. Is that what you meant?
No, well,
He meant on the percentage.
he meant earlier in his presentation that, what was that, 35%?
34.
Yeah, 34.
34%. Was
And it's-
that on the 19 million?
Yes.
It's see, it was 34% of the debt. Rather, it was $1.5 million in debt service payments out of the investment fund
And that's
of the 4.5 million. That's where the 34% comes from.
So 34% of the annual revenue stream coming into the investment fund is going out paying debt.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
It's been asked what the city's benchmarking would look like for its debt. There seems to have been a suggestion or two out in the community in recent months that the city was heavily into debt. Well, the question is compared to what? If anybody thinks that it's abnormal for a city to run its operations without indebtedness, that's not an accurate understanding of reality. One of the benchmarks that we look at is one of our rating agencies for our financial rating, our bond rating, which is Moody's. Moody's would suggest that cities below 50,000, that an acceptable percentage of indebtedness, in other words, debt service payments as a percentage of your total operating expenditures, would be between 7.91% and 7.85. Now, when we say total operating expenditures, we're talking about general fund and investment fund, John?
Yes, and debt service.
Which is kind of a different measure, but keep in mind this is a national measure, so the national measure does not recognize the difference between the investment fund and the general fund. It's all one to them.
Right.
So they're saying if it's between 7.9 and 7.85, you're okay. Well, if you take a look today, we're at 7.29%, so we're well within that range of acceptability. So by that measure, there's not an alarm ringing.
And I think that's important for us to all. When I give speeches, I talk about the rating that Moody's has given us, and I think it's important for people to know that we're well within the range of other cities that are our size in the way we run our city and the debt that we have.
And we have an even more positive measure than that. John, do you want to share the state statute issue?
When people talk about us borrowing money, the city has, per care, has the ability to borrow up to 10% of what the city's worth, not the city itself, but everything, the assessed value of everything. And the city has an assessed value of about $2 billion. So we have a huge capacity, basically. And we went this afternoon just to measure that to see where we're actually at. We could, again, go to 10%. We're at 1.6.
Okay, now those are external. One is statutory, the other one is something that it's very important because we think it affects our bond rating and the cost of what we sell our debt for.
Mhm.
But what this really gets down to, right now, our debt primarily, and the debt that we anticipate, what I mentioned before, the sports things or a city hall remodeling, what have you, if it were to be programmed today based on what we're doing now, it would be programmed out of the investment fund. So when we talk about our debt capacity, what we really need to be thinking about is that 34% of the investment fund annual revenue stream. And if we're going to add to our debt burden, say, another $1 million a year, unless we do something different, I'm not sure how we would or could, but if we take on an obligation that we're not able to otherwise find a revenue stream for, then that obligation gets assumed by the investment fund. The same fund that as of today we need to cut $500,000 from between now and when we bring you a balanced budget. So that's the context, I think, that needs to be considered. Now, how do you remedy that? There's a lot of ways to deal with that. The easiest, I shouldn't say that, mechanically the easiest, as John said, we have all kinds of ability legally to assume more debt. What that means, you have the legal allowance to raise taxes to pay off more debt. You can do it. I mean, you can do it legally. It becomes a values question, I guess, back again to that, and political question, whatever you want to call that, but certainly, if we were to want to maintain the current obligations, inclusive of everything in the investment fund, and take on significant more debt through bonding or borrowing of some sort for whatever, there would need to be a revenue found in order to assume that additional debt burden. Okay, to sum it up, the world as we know it has changed where city budgeting is concerned. The new normal requires more judicious allocation of limited resources, and prioritization of programs is a key. So that concludes the presentation. John, unless you have any remarks you want to summarize or close with, we would certainly entertain any questions the commission might have.
Any questions?
Well, I would like a copy of that presentation, please.
We have them.
Okay, thank you.
I think the thing for us to do is to, is to look at this and think about it. And have we set a date for the budget workshop, Jeff?
No, we have not landed on when we can do that pretty quickly. So let us give some thought to that the next few days, and we'll communicate back with you all, get something we can all agree on.
I think if you have any burning concerns, you need to make Jeff and John aware of them. But in everything you've learned today, I think the city is strong. We've got our challenges. You're going to hear people out there say the city has too much debt. I think it's a national thing. People are concerned about the national debt, so they're concerned about city debt. We're well within the average of other cities our size, so we need to defend that when people tell us that.
We're actually quite a bit below.
Actually, it's quite a bit below. You're right. So we've got our challenges, but the state of the city is strong, and we need to keep that in mind. Our challenge is how to continue to do the things that we want to do to move Paducah forward, to help Chad create more jobs, do things that are going to add to our quality of life, like our new hotel, our riverfront, our soccer park, and things such as that. Those are our challenges. We can't stay still. We have to move forward. So anyway, keep Jeff and John aware of your questions, and we will set a date, and we will pass a budget and move forward.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah,
Thank you.
feel free to contact John or I, any thoughts or suggestions you might have. In the meantime, the department directors and their staffs are working diligently to try to make it work and get a balanced budget ready to bring forward in just a few weeks.
You don't have anything else to report other than what you've talked about, Mr. City Manager?
No, I think I pretty much
I think I'm pretty tired of hearing your voice, quite honestly.
fair enough.
Any commissioner comments? Yeah, there are no public people here, so there are no public comments, no executive session. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Good job.
'Cause they've seen many others just like you.